The Romans, of course, were famously cultural sponges. They would, in the process of creating a stable empire, not only accept, but themselves attempt to absorb the religious ideas and the cultural ideas of the people they would conquer. Most famous example, of course, being the Greek pantheon of gods, which they, very early on, almost identified one for one with their own gods. The very first dynasty of Roman emperors, for example, claimed to be descended from Aeneas, a character from Greek mythological literature that you find in the Iliad. So in the 8th century BC, this hero from a Greek epic suddenly becomes the legendary ancestor of the first dynasty of Roman emperors, the Julio-Claudians. And there we have a classic example of Romans using a foreign religion, a foreign culture, if you will, to give legitimacy to their own rule over foreign countries, especially those that had been influenced by Greek culture. In the first example of this, perhaps in the Julio-Claudian era, the great outstanding literary example perhaps is Virgil's Aeneid. It is a classic work of Latin literature. It tells the epic story of this Aeneas and how he came from ancient Troy to Italy to found the Latin kingdom that would eventually be the ancestor to the Romans. And so there we have both religious and political propaganda being written into epic, beautiful epic literature during the reign of Augustus. It is our contention that the New Testament served a very similar function for the Flavians, integrating Jewish ideas with the Roman Empire and using them to legitimize the second dynasty of Roman emperors, because after all, they had been the ones to conquer the Jews. In order to bring unity to a culturally and religious diverse empire, a multinational empire that stretched from the border of Scotland to the deserts of Arabia, from Spain to Syria, there was a variety of ethnicities, a variety of religions, a variety of cultures that were sometimes in conflict with one another and that needed to be integrated. And just as we've seen that different polytheistic gods were being fused into one, as time wore on, the Romans more and more appeared to be seeking a way to culturally and religiously unify their empire. That was their political motive. And in a philosophical sense, another thing we discovered as we were analyzing the philosophy of the time, Platonism and Neoplatonism was already moving philosophically in the direction of monotheism. And in that sense, Jewish monotheism always made a better fit with Neoplatonic monotheism. And so while the Romans experimented with different forms of monotheism, particularly the sun god, Sol Invictus, the victorious sun, began to be a sort of monotheistic god the government of Rome promoted at that time. So Christianity became an even more tempting form of monotheism that could help unify and pacify the entire empire. The Roman emperors also, the Flavian emperors in particular, began to associate themselves with sun gods. And one of the great statues they built in Rome was a statue of the sun god himself, which they'd converted from an old statue of Nero, their predecessor. And so it's actually quite interesting that Titus himself was born at the end of December, around the time of the solstice, which is, of course, the shortest day of the year, the longest night of the year, and had religious significance for pagans as the birthday of the sun. And so Titus, coming from the east as he did, associated with the sun god as he was, it's more than coincidental, we think, that he was born at about the same time that sun gods in the ancient world were also born.
Born on December 30th, it was interesting that Titus, who was the son of Vespasian, was himself a prince of peace. And in fact, on his coins, he is designated Son of God. For instance, dolphin and anchor pendants are still sold today. You can find them in Catholic stores and are used to symbolize Christianity. There are also symbols of Christ on an anchor that are also used as symbols of Christianity to this day. And so these symbols have survived and are completely related to Christianity. and their Flavian connection has been forgotten.
Indeed, the symbol of St. Clement of Rome is associated with his martyrdom. His legendary martyrdom is that he was drowned on an anchor. And so the anchor is in particular associated with this Flavian, St. Clement of Rome, the author of this early epistle. The anchor symbol can be seen all over Christian churches, all over Europe. Sometimes the fish is replaced by a rope. Sometimes the anchor with fish around them is placed on a giant floor design, and sometimes on mosaics or paintings on the walls of churches. Indeed, at the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, a giant mosque, which was at one time a cathedral in what was then the capital of the Roman Empire, we see giant dolphins adorning the walls. And so these images never came really to an end, and they're still used by Christians to this very day. The dolphin wrapped around an anchor would never have been used, and was never used by Jews, because it would clearly be an image of the divine, of a god, and so would be a graven image in violation of their laws. Of course, it was used as an image by Titus himself in his deification associated with his divinity, and it was the earliest symbol used by Christians to represent Jesus, as it could represent Jesus, if you will, on the cross. But it was never a secret.